All right, welcome to Module 4 discussion, Adapting to Differences. And this was Chapter 5 in the book. Bottom line is we're each unique, so we need to be self-aware and adapt in order to communicate well with all the different kinds of people in the world. The first question is, how can you analyze whether you're assertive or responsive? This is section 5.1.1 in the book, Identifying Social Style. This is talking about two primary dimensions, whether we're assertive or responsive. The way the book describes this is assertive means to stand up for yourself, to be direct, to be challenging, to dare to be different. But there is a negative angle to that dimension. It's that you can be selfish, aggressive, or rude. Now for the other dimension that's responsive, that tends to be sensitive to others. You can set others at ease in a conversation, recognize other people's needs. And then the negative angle is that you tend to be more passive-aggressive actually, meek, and a doormat, and that basically means you let people walk all over you without standing up for yourself. All right, in section 5.1.1 there's a map of combinations between the two dimensions, whether you're assertive or responsive. They named them as being amiable, analytical, a driver, or expressive. So going back to the question, analyzing yourself, well, you can't exactly have a reality TV film crew following you around, and then you could watch yourself in your normal interactions with other people. You have to stop, notice how you're responding to other people when they talk to you. You need to stop and watch other people to see how they act and what kind of behaviors you identify with. Why is self-analysis helpful in acknowledging your own cultural style and perception? Now, this is adapting to social styles in 5.1.2. Being aware of your own social style, and it's interesting that you mentioned cultural style in the question. Maybe I did. You recognize how people are different. You acknowledge your own way of doing things, and you need to see how that fits with the way that other people act. So being aware of your own social style is important because you have to know where you stand in order to adapt to other people. We operate on autopilot, basically. We were raised in a certain way, or we got used to a certain way of acting, or just our own personality. So we tend to just react rather than stopping and thinking first before we say anything or react to people. So we're used to seeing the world from our own single perspective. We don't usually take the time to stop and see things like, how would this other person hear it if I said it in a certain way? We usually just do our thing without stopping to plan out. We don't always stop and think about the ways that other people see things, about what they're thinking in their mind from their perspective, their problem, concerns, grievances they might have, or the things that they are happy about that we don't like. It's really complicated if we stop and reflect about everything that we do, but let's just say it is especially important in the workplace because we rely on good relations, good teamwork in order to make our job easier or to keep our job, basically. Right, there's a term mentioned in the section 5.1.2. It is style flexing. And that means adapting your communication style to reach others. When you've taken the time to reflect, get to know yourself, recognize the styles in other people, you actually adjust your message so that it reaches them. You adjust your perception so that you hear them maybe in the way that they're intending. All right, so I remember I used to work at a place where one day they got a brilliant idea to give us all a personality assessment. It kind of mapped on that same sort of chart of what our personality style is, how we tend to talk, how we tend to perceive things, and it came up with a rating. I forget what I was, but basically everyone took this test and then got some kind of an emblem or a like a rating, and we had to stick that on our door or our cubicle so that whenever someone came to talk to us, they would be able to recognize what kind of person they're approaching, and sort of subconsciously or consciously make that adjustment to the way they're going to start talking about things. So I guess that worked pretty well. I can't think of any way that it made things worse. It's kind of silly, but it did build some kind of awareness that we're talking to different people's styles throughout the day, so we need to adjust, basically. That's all I see. All right, moving on to the next question. What strategies are necessary when adapting to gender differences in the workplace? This is now in section 5.3, adapting to gender differences. So we all know that having stereotypes is a way of coping to make sense in the world. There's a lot of confusing information around us. If we treat each day like we were just born today and everything's new, that's kind of hard to sort things out. So we build up over time patterns, expectations, stereotypes that help us quickly identify and make sense of the things around us. This is good, but also bad. It can cause us to perceive things differently, have misinformed or false expectations about people. And so it's also more of a modern skill, I think, that we're used to the idea that stereotypes in and of themselves are not the best thing, that we have to be a little bit more perceptive and aware of what we're doing when we're stepping into a conversation. You know, is it a minefield if we start throwing around ill-conceived stereotypes? All right, so that was all just to start talking about gender and adapting to gender in the workplace. As we interact with others, we may at first act on our expectations before getting to know them, which is basically bad. I think most of the people that we interact with, especially in this day and age, they don't match the stereotypes that you think. People are not immediately a jock just because they're a guy, and they're not into dolls if they're ladies, you know. I mean, that's silly, but there was a time decades ago when it was pretty easy to just pigeonhole everyone and do what you thought they did and how they thought based on, you know, if they're a man or a woman or if they're from this country or that. Today it's a lot more complicated. We may also interact with others based on our perspective before checking the suitability. We may, I mean, it's so hard to know what is going to offend people these days, but in the workplace, again, since it's a pretty standardized professional environment, there are ways that we can behave without taking chances. You know, we can just be respectful and generally use language that is commonly acceptable. In general, though, there may be some slight differences that help us adjust better. The stereotype for men, though, is to be assertive, direct, and factual. And so, yeah, that is more of a masculine set of traits, that you will be more aggressive or abrupt or upfront about the way that you deal with things. The stereotype for women is to be submissive, caring, and relational. And so that may be true. Some women may tend to be more passive or not be so confrontational, but I would argue both sets, again, are very complicated. Like, a man does not have to be aggressive and into football. He can be interested in art. I'm not saying I'm, you know, either of these, but it's more complex than that, because there are also plenty of women who are very aggressive and less feminine. I don't know. it's a complicated mix. I don't expect any man or woman to be any less than a complex mix of that spectrum. So out of respect and in the workplace, we shouldn't we shouldn't act on those kind of stereotypes. Again, it's just a tool to help us be more self-aware and be more perceptive. It's dangerous to assume that a man or a woman is a specific stereotype. Okay. Now another thing to be aware of in these dimensions is to perceive and gauge and adjust whether it's, again, the typical masculine stereotype of whether they speak a certain way or listen a certain way. But there are, again, two kind of dimensions here for content, for what is said, and relational, how it is said. And it could be argued that, again, that's in the masculine stereotype of being focused more on what is said, not being so sensitive to the feelings around it. And then feminine or women may tend to be more relational, where they're focused on how you say things rather than what you say. You could say, I mean, there's, again, the stereotypical story. A man says something really nice, but he doesn't say it in a very nice way, and so it comes across badly. What are the conversational rituals followed by men and women in the workplace? In section 5.3.1, that's conversational rituals, the text is quoting Deborah Tannen, who's a linguist, regarding a study of conversational patterns in the workplace. She describes them as routine scripts we have learned that help us, well, again, it's autopilot. It's the ways that we've learned to interact with other people, to speak our mind, to hear things. Men tend to use status lens, focusing on status and power, regarding someone with more stature, more power, more prestige, and things are often put across as trying to one-up or put other people down, and a little more competitive. Women tend to use a connection lens, which focuses on closeness, emotionally and psychologically. Not sure if it's entirely useful to rely on these stereotypes, but again, that's something to help, another tool to help you be more perceptive. And still, you can expect that the intended messages will break down, be misinterpreted, or misfire, as they say in the text. You may think, in your mind, you're conveying a message, but it's being interpreted a different way and comes across completely wrong. So the book doesn't seem to talk much about the actual cultural conversational rituals, like the way in culture, on television, in movies, conversation in daily life, things that you learn the way that are normal. And these tend to be more of a factor in the rituals, I think, than whether you're male or female. Some cultures may emphasize that distinction a little more rigidly, like men must behave a certain way in women, and in other cultures, I think, like in the United States, I think it tends to be a little bit more open, loose boundaries. So, all right, now moving on to the next question. Evaluate why comparing and contrasting is considered the best way to understand generational communications. In section 5.4, adapting to generational differences, and then also understanding Generation Y or millennials in 5.4.1. Basically, it's saying finding common ground and understanding ways you can accommodate in order to communicate better. Some suggestions for relating to millennials, if you're older like me, Generation X. Keep more casual, explain your reasoning, ask their opinions, keep things structured. From the other direction, let's say you're younger and you're trying to relate to someone who's older. Older people, back in the ringing telephone with a dial days, they tend to prefer meeting face to face, and we've discussed already why that's important, because you you're more attuned to being aware of the nonverbal communication, the facial expression, the body movements when you're talking to someone, and you may miss out on important details if you don't see them in person and you don't build that trust. Monitor your slang or your technical jargon. Maybe some people don't follow the latest trends in whatever gadgets everybody uses, but just try to communicate in more general language, and this is especially true in the workplace. Again, you can always fall back on the kind of the standard culture in the workplace, the language, the means of communication, and that will get you by. So avoid super esoteric modern slang unless it's normal in your workplace. Avoid stereotyping and value their experience. So I enjoyed reading about the difference between younger and older generations. I feel like I'm kind of in between, though. I'm still struggling to relate to baby boomers and millennials. I'm in between, and so I still feel like I get both of them pretty well, but I do get the struggle, like understanding why one group of people sees things differently. And so again, the message in this chapter has been about stopping and reflecting on your own style and seeing where it matches up against other people. Sometimes you've got to adapt. A lot of times you've got to stop and put things a little different than you normally would. All right, thanks everybody. Look forward to your comments.